Hello, Millennial leaders. I'm excited that we continue on with this journey. It's been a real pleasure for me to just interview some really fascinating millennials that are doing some amazing things around these United States and frankly around the world. It's amazing to see how many of you are listening. I think today we eclipsed over 150 downloads, and I'll be honest, I didn't expect to be anywhere near those numbers in about our first month or so. I also want to update you. I've made a greater commitment to stay on top of this. I've ordered a microphone, so I'm hoping some of the sound issues that you may have heard in the past will be filtered out with this microphone. So if you notice better sound in the future, I'd love some encouragement. Shoot me a Facebook message. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at Reyes_Carlos_. All right, let's get to Josh. I'm really excited to bring you the story of Josh Duggar. For many of you that do know or have heard of Josh, he was originally on 19 and Counting, which I think at the time may have been 15 or 14 and Counting, when the TV show first aired. Josh is the oldest son of the Duggar clan. Well, today Josh is the executive director of FRC Action in Washington, D.C. I really enjoyed our conversation about leadership because Josh touched on some things that no one else has. The one that really stuck out to me was this idea of a leader possessing meekness. Meekness, which is power under control. It's a really powerful image for what I think we want to emulate in our leadership. Josh also spends time speaking about character. And while we have all these other things surrounding us and all these gifts and talents, the foundation for those talents needs to be our very character. I had a great conversation with Josh. I hope that you get tons of value from this conversation. I know that I did. Let's jump in.
Welcome to the Millennial Leader Podcast with Carlos Reyes, encouraging and equipping a generation to lead.
Wow, here we are, our 7th podcast, Millennial Leaders. I'm really excited to have a new friend on with me today, Josh Duggar. Josh and I met probably 2 months ago at a conference. We kind of bumped into each other, and that's when we first got to meet. And then now over time, Josh is in Washington, D.C., and I'll let him share a little bit about his story. But we've spent some time together. Josh, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much, Carlos. It's great to be with you.
Absolutely. So you're well known for many things, but I would love for you to just share a little bit about your story, and then we'll transition into this idea of millennial leadership.
Well, it was, I think it was in 1996 that my dad first really felt led to get involved in politics. And it was actually through a friend of ours who we came in contact with, who was an eye doctor that left his practice there, a very successful career, to go and run for state senate. And my dad was inspired by a man named David Barton, who many of you know, and he had shared a story about the founding fathers and what inspired them and what made them want to be involved in the process. And so it was at that point that my dad thought, well, I'll try to get involved. And so we connected with this man who was running for state senate and worked in his campaign and ended up helping him get elected. And it was just a short time after that my dad saw the need to. We went down to Little Rock to our state capitol, and there was a rally going on out there in front of the capitol. And one of my brothers had a surgery, so it was convenient. We went down there to the children's hospital, and we found out about this rally going on. And anyway, we went over there, and it was a rally to ban partial birth abortion. And I can remember as a young boy standing out in front of this the Capitol. There was about 5,000 people lining up in front of the Capitol, and these all these people were saying basically we agree that partial birth abortion should be outlawed. It should be illegal in the state of Arkansas. And but what happened that day was not only did they strike down the ban and allow that horrendous procedure to continue, but they even made jokes and they laughed and things like that when it came up in the committee. And I think at that point, my dad really felt like he may not have the pedigree. He may not have all the things that people say you need to get involved. But yet he knew that he could vote the right way and he could encourage other people to do the same. And so that really inspired him. And so he did some things in his life that, that a lot of people would say were crazy. he left. He ended up changing his career in a couple of places and different things to readjust. And in 1998, he ran for state representative, and against all odds, he was elected. And then he was elected again in another one of these situations, and he was the first Republican in that district for, I think, since Reconstruction. It had been a long time. Wow. And so it was really one of these things where he knew that God had called him to do something that was greater than him, than himself. And so he went out there to Little Rock, and he took some things that were really passionate to him, like standing up for the unborn and tax relief for families and things like that. But he was one of 13 Republicans out of 100 in the Arkansas House. And so it was quite a challenge to be able to work and to be able to actually get things done. And so when he introduced a bill that was requiring, I think it was informed consent provisions, and there was a couple others like ultrasound before you could have an abortion and things like this that have now passed. They laughed him out of the committee. And it was on the heels of corruption and scandals and things like that. Of course, Whitewater was going on right before that. And so there was a lot of things that in Arkansas politics were more reminiscent of something a little further north like Chicago or something like that. But we really, I think, growing up, I can remember as well my dad just telling us, that duty is ours and results are up to the Lord. And so as I was watching, his career and how he had really put a lot of things on the line, his reputation, and a lot of these things, I knew that he was following the call of the Lord to step out. And so as he continued to be persistent and standing up, and he was able to inspire other people to get involved. And I think there was a team of people there who really understood what was at stake. And the fact that we had to band together as Christians and as people of faith to go beyond just speaking out, voting, or even just being involved in the local level, but saying we really need to unite in purpose for this cause. And so in 2002, he felt like God was calling him to do something that was way beyond his comfort zone, and that was to run for United States Senate. And he was in the House, and I can remember that we would go to Governor Huckabee's office, who was our governor there in Arkansas, and there was just a handful of us who would go in there. Of course, I was the youngest of those, and my dad would take me with him, and we would go in there and we would pray. And these were men and women who understood that the strength that we have did not come from just the government or from even individuals or people, but it came from Almighty God. And so we would get down and we would start our week there during the session praying. I think it was really through those moments that my dad felt this urge to just say, let's step out and let's do something beyond you, something that's completely impossible. And so he did. He ran for United States Senate. And he throughout that campaign, people told him, "You're crazy. What are you thinking? How could this be?" And it was at that moment that he actually ended up losing. He got 22% of the vote. But it was the day before we were going down to the polling place there to cast our ballots. And of course, I was not young. I was too young, not old enough to vote at that point. But it was back when we had a small family. We only had 13 children at the time, and so there was 13 of us lined up there. And basically, this Associated Press photographer took a photo of our family, and it said, the caption underneath read something like, "This crazy guy from Arkansas with all these kids lost in the election against the incumbent for U.S. Senate." And I think they did it really to make fun of our family. And but what God meant for, or what they meant for evil, God meant for good. And I think that's what we found to be the case, because it was the very next day that the Parents Magazine was reading the New York Times article, and they contacted us and said, "We would like to do a story about your family. We feel like there's an interesting angle here." And so my parents entered this on the same premise that they had entered everything in their life, and it was that faith is the core of our life. And if you edit our faith, or if you take that out, you don't have a story. And so they went into it with that, and I think that was really the inspiration that continued to drive them. And so as they stepped out, and they did this article. It was a 5-page article there. It was very successful, and it was also in Ladies' Home Journal. And I think people were able to see a different side and to see a different perspective in a family who's living and out there, but also, a little larger than most. And so it was an interesting time in our family, because I think the Lord had used politics to prepare us for sort of the national spotlight and some of the things that would come to be. And so it was actually a Discovery Channel producer who Parents Magazine, and said, this would be an interesting story. Maybe we could do a documentary with this family. And so in 2003, they contacted us, and we began to film our first documentary called 14 Children and Pregnant Again. And we did a series of documentaries after that, of course, after its initial success. Became the #1 rated show on Discovery Health Channel, and then moved up to the Learning Channel, which now has grown, I think they said, 6 times in its size over the years as we've been on. And we moved to a series about 6 years ago, which is called 19 Kids and Counting. And so it's been quite an adventure. And one of the first shows on there was actually my wife Anna and I getting married. And so that was one of the first episodes that was highlighted in that, and it was just a neat experience. So pretty much a lot of things in my life have been documented over the years on this show, and now we've done over 200 episodes. Wow. With the network, and just all giving glory to God, because I think that it's the longest running show on TLC, and when you look at the history of reality shows and you look at the content and the different things that most of these others are promoting, ours sort of really runs countercultural in many ways to what you're seeing out there. But we also hear from people. We hear from families saying that they're encouraged, and they're I think inspired to see a family that's able to really function. And it's not that we're perfect. It's not that we have everything together, because it's quite the opposite. It's actually that we serve an awesome God, and that He has given us the ability to, when we come upon problems, when we come upon challenges, to meet those things head on, and to be able to share the good news that He's given to us with others. And so that's really our goal. And so from there, I actually, my wife and I were married, and I had started a small car dealership, and ended up building that up to where we had a few locations, and the Lord had just really seemed to bless. And I had the opportunity to work in the state senate in Arkansas, work on 3 or 4 statewide campaigns, and I saw a need for people who entered politics. I saw that a lot of these men and women would get involved, and they would have great goals and great aspirations. They would say, I want to reform, I want to see things changed. But over time, they would not only really step aside from those principles and convictions, but they'd often become part of the problem themselves. And so my goal was really to encourage them and give them the tools and things they needed to make a difference. And so I started a company working with over 40 campaigns over time from 2006 and on. And I was able to work alongside some of these young leaders and people getting involved in the process. And it was really encouraging, because I've seen them now moving up and into all levels of state government, and actually some here in Washington now. And it's just encouraging to see what the Lord has done even through the testimony of my parents, being willing to step out and to make an impact and make a difference in their sphere of influence. And so it was last year, I was working on the heartbeat bill in Arkansas, and I had connected with several people on a couple of presidential campaigns that I worked on in 2008 and also in 2012. Those were Mike Huckabee and Rick Santorum. And one of those people was Tony Perkins at the Family Research Council, and we had reconnected, and he had served in the Louisiana State House the same time my dad was in the Arkansas State House, so they had that in common. It had met many years ago. And I was up here for the March for Life in D.C., and I had just finished doing some work there on the heartbeat bill in Arkansas. And so Tony bumped into me literally as I was coming out of the speakers area there at the March for Life, and he said, I'd be interested if you could come to do my radio show. And I said, well, I'd be happy to. So I went to I went to do his radio show, and he said to me, I'm looking for somebody to run my 501c4 FRC action. And he said, would you be interested? And I said, well, I know a lot of people. Maybe I could recommend someone. He said, no, I really want you. And so I said, well, I don't think that would be me. And as I talked with my wife, we said it would involve a move to D.C. and a number of things. I said, no, definitely not for us. And so we literally just kind of took it back from there and said, it's not of the Lord. No way that could be from the Lord. So as we, contemplated, leaving a successful business and moving away from our family and career and all these things, I was back in Arkansas working with the state senator who I was helping on this pro-life legislation. And he said to me, you didn't pray about that? You didn't even consider that? And I said, no, I really didn't. And I said, I already knew the answer. The Lord, basically, that's one you don't have to pray about. If you just know something is not logical, can't be of the Lord. And how many times we do that? And so I did start to pray about it. And I went back to my dad, and he said, you need to pray about that, son. And I thought, okay, well, I guess I need to. And so I did, and I contacted them, and they said, we'll sit for the interview. And so I came to Washington and sat down at the interview, and I just knew at that point that the Lord had really had directed my steps and led me in the path that He had set before me. And so it was quite a change to move. In June of last year, we moved our family up here to Washington, and it's been quite an adventure now over the last few months. Really just not only following the Lord, but really just realizing where He's placed me for such a time as this. So
thanks for sharing all that.
It's a lot of information, and I think people ask me, why do you share that backstory? But I think that, really, it is who we are. And when you look at the series of events that God has placed in my life, there's no explanation other than it's the Lord and His working. So
I'm with you 100%. Our backstories are what shape us and help define our future. And for you and I, certainly the role that God plays in that, in orchestrating ourselves. It's funny that you mentioned about praying about it. My wife just yesterday said, and she's a teacher, but she said, hey, I think we should pray about volunteering or serving with the kids, the Crusade kids. And I thought, no, that's not me. Not little ones, no. And you deal with little ones all the time. She's like, well, are you not going to even pray about it? And I was like, oh, okay, we'll pray about it. But I just don't. But it was similar in that you're right. There are some things that we dismiss so quickly. And sometimes the Lord is saying, you need to pause on that just a minute and wait to hear from me. So I thank you for all that backstory. It's actually a really interesting backstory, and it's part of why I wanted to have you on here. I would love to hear, what was it like having all those brothers and sisters? You were the oldest. You are the oldest. I imagine you had to develop some leadership to help mom and dad. Tell me about that.
Well, I think that there's a lot of things you learn growing up in a large family that are, very applicable to life. For one, the world doesn't revolve around you. And I think that if you look at the life of Christ and what He really exemplified, it was servant leadership. And it was realizing that, whether you're washing the feet of the people that are supposed to be serving you, like Jesus did, if you can imagine a man coming to this earth that could have showed up and, sort of whipped out his credentials and said, here I am, I'm Jesus Christ, I'm from heaven, and I'm here to just, sort of like the FBI agents do when they pop out and they're undercover. Jesus could have done that. He could have showed up and he could have just said, here's who I am, and reveal His identity. But He decided to come to us in a way because He wanted us to emulate who He was. And I'll tell you, my mom did a great job of doing that in our family, coming and saying, you know what, whatever comes your way, I'll be there for you. And I want you to learn to give to others and to realize that servants, being a servant is the greatest thing that you can do. And so looking for the needs of others. And I think that, and that's something my parents taught me. And so obviously from a young age, whether it's interacting with my siblings or as we went out, on weekends, I remember we would go to nursing homes and we would share there with the older people and to hear their stories and to hear of all the things they had accomplished in their lives or whatever it may have been. But yet to realize that in everyone's life, we all have all these different backgrounds, all these things we're dealing with, but yet we all have the same inerrant things that are built into us. And it's, I think, the need to be filled in that void that we have. And so realizing that the only way to fill that void is through the love of Jesus Christ, and letting that pour out of everything that we do in our life is so much important, is the greatest importance that we can have.
It is true. And something that I talk about a lot with people is, how do we articulate that? How are we able to explain to people? And then, of course, there's the void argument and many of these other things. But how do we articulate what drives us? And in our case, it certainly is our faith. I believe it because I believe it's the truth. I believe Jesus Christ died on the cross for our sins because it's the truth. And there's love, compassion, all these things that come up with it. Can you talk about how maybe your father has shaped you, some of the leadership in your life? I know for me, and here's the reason why I asked, I know for me, my father has played a significant role in that, and I imagine your father's, but I'd love to hear you just touch on that subject a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think that, often, I think there's different things that we use to define leadership, and I think, going back to Scripture and looking at all the great leaders who were there, or going back to the founding of this country, looking at people like George Washington and others who really understood, what was at stake at that point in their life and in time. And I think those things, though we may have different problems today, we may be dealing with different situations, the principles haven't changed. And when you start talking about leadership and what is a great leader, I think my dad really has exemplified in so many ways. I think humility is one of the greatest aspects of leadership that is really central to what defines great leaders. And so when you start talking about leading people or encouraging others, I think it really has to come back through filtering all those things through that lens. And I think often as men and as leaders in general, I think we want to blow people off. And I think that Jesus exemplified one quality that a lot of people that I know don't have, and that is that he understood meekness, which is strength under control. And I think that's one of the dangers when you start talking about leadership. We want to feel like it's power and it's strength and it's all these great things. When you look at the dictators of the world, that's what they use. They can sort of press their things on people. But when you look at what a real true leader does, he comes in and he looks at things from a different perspective, and he's able to provide that. And I think that's really what my dad has exemplified, is someone who has great strength and great power, and someone who has accomplished a lot of things in his life, but yet he's able to take those things and yield his personal rights and expectations to God, which is really meekness, and being able to do that. And then also, I think the definition of humility, and really the opposite of that being pride, is recognizing that God is actually responsible for the achievements in our life, and giving credit in making known to God and others for the ways that they've benefited our life. And so I think that's those are things that really define leaders, and really saying it's not the things that you're going to think of. It's not the rock stars of the world, those who are out there achieving for themselves, but it's people who are saying, no, I'm willing to do my very best, because in knowing that everything that I do should be pleasing, first of all, to God.
Touching a little bit on that, and I think you did a little bit, so let's just do it so it's real simple for people to hear. If we ask the question, what does an ideal millennial leader look like, you would say they need to possess meekness, certainly humility. Do you have 2 or 3 other ones that you would suggest?
Yeah, I would say obedience as well, which is really the freedom to be creative under the protection of divinely appointed authorities. And I think that when you look at who are we obedient to, and as a leader, often we want to feel like, well, hey, we can go out and make the rules. I know when I was in business, the buck stops here kind of thing. But as a leader, really realizing that, no, God is our ultimate authority. And yeah, you may be able to, I know people who are in business who make great deals of money legally, but is it right before God? Is it morally right? Is it morally, something good? And I think you look at leaders who say, no, I know this, I may be able to get by with this. There may be ways that I can do things. And I think, but is that morally right? And making sure that we justify those things based on God's moral law. And I think when you look at just the physical makeup of a leader and the way that they conduct themselves, I think a lot of times it is, especially for young leaders, one of the things that I've had told to me numerous times is you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and God made you that way for a reason. And being willing to learn from others, and when people are sharing things with you, you can really receive the greatest blessing. When you look at Elijah in Scripture, he passed that mantle down as he was leaving away, and you think of all the people that are around you in your life that could probably impart something to you. And often in our youth and our inexperience, we want to go out and act like we've got everything together. But often we just got to take some time to slow down and to listen and to hopefully learn from those around us.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring that up because this is one of the things I've been thinking about as the leadership transition from the boomer generation to the Gen Xer generation and then eventually to millennials. What should a millennial leader like yourself do to, I don't know, put at ease or help the older generation feel comfortable with passing the baton to that next generation? Do you have any advice?
Well, I think a lot of it is proving, that we're worthy of that. And I think that's something that, there's a generation out there nowadays that is so disconnected from really, I would say just from wisdom in a lot of ways. And I think when you look at exemplifying those things and showing and proving yourself, I think a lot of it comes from really just the basics. And, I think there's such an emphasis put on education today and less of an emphasis put on character. And if you talk to some of the richest people in the world, or if you talk to some of the greatest political leaders or those who have achieved great things, as I've had the opportunity to do around the world, it is you won't hear from them, oh, I wish that I could have the brightest student, the most successful person that there was, or someone who has great head knowledge or things like that. Now you may hear them say those things, but it's always in conjunction with, I wish that person, I want the people to work for me. I want someone to lead my company who has the very best character, someone who understands what it takes to serve others, what leadership means in its greatest, and really exemplifies those things through their life. And so when you're doing job interviews, when you're talking with these people, you often hear a lot of people touting credentials or different things like that. But ultimately it comes back to, are they a hard worker, and do they have what it takes to lead? And so I think as we're talking as young leaders to the older generation, and I don't want to say much older, but some of them, in that category, I think it's important that we're able to prove to them that we are not only competent, but that we have the character and the moral fortitude, the caliber that they're looking for.
Do you think that older generation is more interested in character or competence?
Well, I would say that both go hand in hand in a lot of ways. But I would also say that you're bound by your character in a lot of ways, because it's really your framework of who you are, and it's really the core. And I would say as a Christian, that your character is determined by, really your relationship with the Lord. And as you draw closer to God, He will draw closer to you. And therefore, you're going to exemplify more of the Christian life, which is Christ-like in your life. And so as I've went through life, I think that, exemplifying the character of Christ, is something that I do every day. And as a husband, my wife Anna and I have been married for over 5 years now, and
Congrats.
I think there's nothing that is more of a picture of Christ and in the church and Christ and the way that He loves each one of us than marriage. And often it's a hard call, because you want to go out and you want to do some of the greatest things there is. You want to go out and do amazing ministry. You want to go out and conquer the world, but yet you have to you have to prove that in your relationship with your spouse. You have to prove that with your relationship with your kids or with your parents, your family, and then you can go out and do great things. So I would say it's character overall.
I've had a lot of people mention to me that a lot of leadership comes down to relationships. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Relationships are very important. It's been neat for me working at the Family Research Council, and my boss is Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin, and a man who's endured some incredible hardship in his life, but also a man who's been resilient and someone who understands, obviously the power of the gospel and the redeeming and saving grace of Christ, but also really standing up in the face of extreme trial. And I think that you look at people like my boss, and I have to say good things about him because I still work for him. But even looking at it from an outside perspective and saying, what makes people go on? What makes people continue? And I think that this is something that we have as Christians that a lot of people in this world don't have. And it is really saying we have a hope. And our goal as Christians should be to share that hope with as many people as possible. And when we look at these stories of people who have done great things, you filter all that down to small decisions that they've made in their life. And when you look at great leaders, it was often that nobody was looking, or when it wasn't significant, is when they really defined who they were. And I was in Boston a couple weeks ago, and I went to the house of Paul Revere. And I was reminded of a man who really was a traitor, if you look at it. I mean, he really was. He was stepping out in a time when it wasn't popular to do something that was bigger than who he was. And so it was a very modest house that he lived in. It wasn't anything flattering. And the church, there across the street, was a lot like a church anywhere else in this country. But yet this man did something significant. And you look at George Washington, he was a man who really just kind of fell into a place where he said, okay, I'm going to step up and I'm going to take a lead. And as he began to really develop and really as a young man, extremely young, he really defined himself because he upheld extreme amount of character. And so every one of these men, as you really look back, okay, what would be the number one thing that would define them as a leader, and what was sort of the trend? I would say that it was the extreme amount of character that they displayed in their life. And that's really what I think will define leaders from here on out. And I think there's something that's, yes, people can fall on to money, they can fall on to fame, and they can ultimately fall on to, power and fortune. But I think that often it is character that defines those who are truly leaders that will be, upheld and really esteemed for generations to come.
You mentioned some amazing men who were known for their character. Certainly George Washington, Paul Revere is very well known throughout history. Do you have someone in history, or perhaps maybe a mentor today, that you look up to?
I'm extremely encouraged by working in the state level politics by some of the people who are getting involved these days. And so I would say that a lot of my heroes are modern day heroes, because you look at where we are in our country today, and you look at Congress, you look at the Senate, you look at the executive branch, and some of the overreach that we see, and really just the lack of either appreciation, maybe it's understanding, or maybe even in some cases it's just the outright denial of what America is and what America stands for. I think that really looking at these things from the right perspective is important. And as we're talking through these things with some of these leaders that I've seen on the state level, I've just seen such a passion and a boldness. And, I think we need more of that. You look at politics in general, and you look at the leaders that we've had here in recent history, there's a lot of people who are spineless, who won't stand up. And, this country would have never been founded had we had those kind of leaders in place. And it's really sad, because you look at some of these people and you say, wow, what is our country going to look like? in 50 years, and even in 10 years? What are we going to look like? And as I think, of my 3 children now, and I think, what are they going to look at when they think of America? But I am encouraged because I see these leaders who are on the state level or who are working in local government, and some of them here in Washington, in Congress, quite honestly, in the Senate, who are saying, you know what, I don't care about my political career. I don't care about the future of, my bank account or what my portfolio is going to look like. But you know what? I care about this country, and I care about the principles it was founded on. And I understand what is at stake. And so therefore, I'm going to take a stand, and I'm going to make sure that my time that I'm given to leadership, whatever that may be, whether it's a state representative, whether it's a mayor, whatever it may be, I'm going to stand up, and I'm going to do what I feel is best and what I feel like God's called me to do, regardless of the cost. And I know that there was a state senator that I worked with very closely on some pro-life legislation in Arkansas last year. And, he knew he was walking into a very tough challenge. But this man said, I know what I'm doing, and I know that the cause is worthy. And regardless of what this may cost me, I'm going to stand, and I'm going to take this stand. And he did that, and he knew what he was going into when he walked into it. And I think that's the kind of leadership that we need, is people who say, I'm on the right side of this issue, and whether I'm standing alone or whether there's hundreds of thousands standing with me, I'm going to continue to stand. And I think true leadership is standing alone. And when you look back in history, many of the leaders were by themselves for quite some time. But yet, in time, it was proven that they were the caliber and that they understood, the principles, and that those were worth fighting for.
Speaking of great leadership, what would you say is the best leadership advice you've ever gotten?
Well, I think it's a tough question. I think my dad really has, as I said, I think if you ask me who my greatest leader is, I think it would be him. But I think that you look at leadership advice, I think there's so many things. But I know that I remember a quote one time, I think the author was even unknown, but it said, the greatest use of life is to spend it for something that will outlast it. And there's so many things in life, whether it's, fame or fortune, all those things are fading. Nobody can name who was the number one, person on television 50 years ago, or who was the number one person in the U.S. Senate or in Congress 50 years ago. Most people off the top of their head are not going to remember those things. But if you start naming some of the people who were heroes and people who have stood up over time, you may not remember their names, but you will remember the outcome of some of the decisions that they've made and some of the things that they have influenced. And so I think that realizing that our ultimate goal is not to win political battles or to go out and create great legislation or to even just do good things. It really is to promote and to turn people to the Lord Jesus Christ, and realizing that that's where their hearts are going to be changed. That's where their lives are going to be changed. And so that everything we do should be an extension of that. And realizing that as fruit of that, they're going to be able to see where we are, whether it's in policy and politics, or whether it's in business and treating people right, doing what's, I think following the golden rule. All these things tie in to Christianity. But it should never be that we are using these things to try to prop up or to go out and push our own agenda. It should always be central to the fact that we are doing these things to honor and glorify the Lord.
Thank you for sharing all that. Leadership is not this nice and tidy. I think you're right. There's not like this leadership package that we can just give to people. There's a lot to it. So I really appreciate you thinking through it. And this is a part of the show where I like to ask folks, if you had one resource, Josh, that you could give to people, what is the resource you'd recommend?
Well, I think there's a lot of things that I would recommend, but I would say that years ago my dad encouraged me to listen to the Financial Freedom Seminar, and it really changed my life in a lot of ways. And my wife and I have been able to be debt free And I think my parents actually, I think we have a link up to it on DuggarFamily.com. You can go to their website there and you can follow it over. But the Financial Freedom Seminar by Jim Sammons is the guy's name. He's a real estate developer out of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And anyway, he shares a lot of his personal stories of failure and how by the age of 30 he was hoping to be a millionaire. And instead, he was amassed a massive amount of debt and really was quite a failure at everything he had set himself to do. But he realized at that point some biblical principles that he could put into place, and a lot of things that tie into leadership. And so that's what he did. And it was really neat to see that remarkable story. It's just really personal testimony and biblical principles that were woven into that. And so I highly recommend it, and I hope that anyone listening would be able to take advantage of that. And I encourage you to listen to it and to really take those things to heart, because it's been very transformational for me.
I'll definitely link to it in the show notes. I'll find it on the Duggar website too and put the link on there. How can people reach you, connect with you?
Well, I'm on Twitter at Josh Duggar, JoshDuggar, and that's a good way to connect with me. I'm also up on Facebook and LinkedIn as well. You can find me up on there. Obviously, not a whole lot of time that I have to connect with people, given the fact I'm pretty busy. But you can also go to frcaction.org. That's frcaction.org. And we have a lot of different resources listed there and ways that people can connect. I'm honored to host the Values Voter Summit, which is coming up actually this year here, September 26th through 28th. That's here in Washington, D.C. with a bunch of top conservative leaders. And again, I think all of these things tying back to just ways that people can be engaged in the political process and realizing that it's a domain that God has created. And as Christians, as believers, it's our call. And as leaders, it's our call to step up and to make a difference.
So one last question I like to ask. If you could give one action step, one piece of advice today that millennial leaders or future millennial leaders listening to this podcast can do, what would that be?
Well, I would say it would be, I think the Great Commission. Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. And so if that is preaching the gospel as you do here in Washington, or if that is working, I'd say working among the heathen here in Washington, or if it is if it is going to your local community and making a difference or speaking out, I think looking beyond you. If you work at McDonald's and you're flipping hamburgers, there is people that you come in contact with that you can influence in a positive direction. But looking, I think if you want to, people always say, I want to be successful, or I want to go out and do something amazing. Well, how are you going to get there? I think getting there is by going out and just serving, just being a servant of all. And that's what Jesus did. And I think if you look at some of the most successful people in this world, they were servant-oriented. They were people who were out there looking for ways that they could better others. Not better themselves, but better others. And I think that's what I would encourage people to take away, is so go and do.
I love it. Thank you, Josh. That has been a pretty consistent theme these last couple of podcasts, is this idea of servant leadership and learning to serve others. So I'm really thankful that you touched on it again. It's something that I believe very powerfully in. And I know God ordained this conversation, and for you to say it right here at the end. Josh Duggar, thank you. I'll definitely have a lot of these things in the show notes. While you may not be able to interact with them on Twitter, they can certainly follow you, see what you're doing, be able to keep up. And whenever you've got, 45 hours to go through all your social media stuff, you may be able to commit.
Try. Well, thanks, Carlos.
Absolutely. Thanks, Josh. God bless.
God bless.
Thank you, Josh Duggar, for taking some time out of your day to sit and speak with me on leadership. All right, millennial leaders, you need to make your way over to Michael Hyatt's website at michaelhyatt.com. Michael's got a great article talking about the reflex of character. We've really got to sharpen and strengthen our character so that it becomes a reflex. I would point you in the direction of Michael Hyatt. It's something I'm going to be thinking about and writing out in the future. But right now, I want you to head over to Michael Hyatt's website and search his article, The Reflex of Character. Check the show notes for more information. Thanks again for listening into the podcast. And please, 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 please go put a review on iTunes. Thanks, everyone. Bye.